Ma'am, we are unable to hear you, ma'am. Tarna, ma'am, we are unable to hear you. Ma'am, could you please try rejoining once again, ma'am?
I am calling her.
Ma'am, we are unable to hear you, ma'am.
No, we can't hear you. कह रहा है आप rejoin कीजिए.
Abhi?
Yes, you are audible now.
Yeah. So we can start?
Yes.
Yes. So a very good afternoon, everybody, one and all present here. So today we are here for a learning session on internal generative organs. So we are having with us Dr. Shashi, who will be taking a session on the internal generative organs. Very good afternoon, Dr. Shashi. Welcome you here for this session. Yeah, so ma'am is a senior specialist in DDU Hospital. We have known her as an excellent teacher and a very enthusiastic academician. She has a number of roles of great responsibility, including being the secretary of DGF Southwest and the forthcoming president of DGF Southwest. So we all welcome you here, ma'am, for the session.
Yeah.
I think without wasting much more time, we can just start the session and we can have all the questions at the end. I request all the participants that whatever queries they have, they can put in the chat box, which can be addressed at the end of the session.
Thank you, Dr. Taruna, for such a kind introduction, and thank you, Anbai Office, for giving me this opportunity. So, dear students, we are coming straightway to our topic. I am sharing my screen. Is my screen visible?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So today we are talking about internal generative organs. As you know that we have already covered external generative organs in our last class. So this is a schematic diagram of female internal generative organs. I purposefully kept this diagram for you to show because this is very easy to draw. And remember one thing, if in theory exam you draw the diagram and you label, then you will always get extra marks. So these are the fimbria, this is fundus, fallopian tube, body, internal os, cervix, fornix, vagina, and external os. This is another picture taken from the Williams 25th edition, sort of 3D picture. The non-pregnant uterus lies in the pelvic cavity. All of you know that it lies between the bladder, which is the anterior part, and the rectum, which is situated posteriorly. And almost the entire posterior wall of the uterus is covered by serosa. You can see here, that is visceral peritoneum. And in anteriorly, from here, the peritoneal fold comes up, bladder. So here you see, this is the right lateral part. And if you see this at A, it is an oviduct or fallopian tube connection. B is for round ligament. At the uterine condyle, we have three important structures, and C meant for ovarian ligament is rather little posterior. Fallopian tube is little above and in the midline, and round ligament is little below and anterior. And this is the ureter. All of you must have heard the verse, bridge over river. Uterine artery crosses it anteriorly. So let's come to the uterus. Dr. Taruna, am I audible and visible?
Yes, very clearly, Dr. Shashi, no problem.
Okay. So the lower portion of this peritoneum forms the anterior boundary of the rectouterine cul-de-sac or pouch of Douglas, and only the upper portion of the anterior uterine wall is covered by visceral peritoneum. I have already shown you. And as the caudal border of this portion, the peritoneum reflects forward onto the bladder dome to create the vesico-uterine pouch. So we have two pouches, vesicouterine pouch and rectouterine pouch. And the lower portion of the anterior uterine wall is separated from the posterior wall of the bladder only by a well-defined loose connective tissue, the vesicouterine space. Dear students, I know that anatomy is a big boring, but then we have to know it and we have to revise it again and again. So please keep on revising these things, and knowing a good anatomy is the essential prerequisite for becoming a good surgeon. Unless you recognize a structure, you cannot do surgery. So it is very important to identify any structure while doing surgery. So clinically, during cesarean delivery, the peritoneum of the vesicouterine pouch is sharply incised. All of you must have done it, and the vesicouterine space is entered. So when we do cesarean, we enter the vesicouterine space, and dissection caudally within this space lifts the bladder safely off the lower uterine segment for hysterectomy and delivery. If we do not do this step, then we might end up injuring the bladder. So coming to the uterus is a pear-shaped organ and consists of two major but unequal parts. The upper part or the larger portion is called body or corpus, and the lower smaller cervix projects into the vagina. There are lots of doubt about the definition of isthmus. So let's forget all small books and remember what the William says. Isthmus is a union site of these two. It is of special obstetric significance because it forms a lower uterine segment during pregnancy. So the lower uterine segment in pregnancy, which you get in advanced pregnancy after 28 weeks, that is formed from isthmus. At each superolateral margin of the body is uterine conum, from which a fallopian tube emerges, along with the round and the ovarian ligament, I have already told you. And between the points of fallopian tube insertion is the convex upper uterine segment that is called the fundus. If I go back to the slides, then you will see that this is the fundus, this convex upper part just above the insertion of the fallopian tube. The bulk of the uterine body, but not the cervix, is muscle. And these muscles are the reason behind the myomatural contraction and stopping bleeding after delivery. They are an important safeguard for preventing PPH. The inner surface of the anterior and posterior wall lies almost in contact, and the cavity between these walls forms a mere slit. The nulligravidia uterus measures 6 to 8 centimeter in length, and the multiparous uterus 9 to 10 centimeter. The average weight of uterus is 60 grams, and typically it weighs more in parous women. Pregnancy stimulates remarkable uterine growth due to muscle fiber hypertrophy. Uterine fundus, which was previously a flattened convexity between tubal insertions, now become dome-shaped in pregnancy. Moreover, the round ligaments appear to insert at the junction of middle and upper thirds of the organ. Because the fundal part increases, the round ligament then it descends. It appears to have descended. The fallopian tube elongates, but the ovaries grossly appear unchanged even during pregnancy. So whenever you do cesarean, you just have a look that ovaries are not much enlarged. All other organs seem to be enlarged and edematous. So coming to the cervix, very important part. This portion of the uterus is cylindrical and has a small apertures at each end, the internal and external cervical ora. The endocervical canal runs through the cervix and connects these ora. The cervix is divided into upper and lower portions by the vagina's attachment to its outer surface. The upper portion is called the portio supravaginalis, which begins at the internal os, which correspond to the level at which the peritoneum is reflected up onto the bladder. And the lower cervical portion protrudes into the vagina and is called portio vaginalis. Remember, there are lots of doubts about different anatomical names and terms and terminologies. Do you remember exactly those what are written in authentic textbook? It's a beautiful picture. Here you see uterus and adnexa and associated anatomy. Ovary, fimbria of the fallopian tube, uterine artery. It goes like this, and here is the ureter. Uterine artery crosses the ureter from lateral to medial from above, and this ovary or these almost in connect clear vicinity of the fimbria. From here, though, ova is picked up and goes to the fallopian tube. Then we have infundibulopelvic ligament. I will come to all these in details. Then portio vaginalis cervix and portio vaginal wall. This is the cut portion. Here is the isthmus. And this wing-shaped part is broad ligament. Then you have uterovarian ligament, through which the utero means one attachment of uterus and another attachment of the ovary. Then we have portio supravaginalis cervix. And this is the cut section showing endometrium. This is myometrium. This is parametrium. And we have iliac vessels in connection. Then this is very important. Round ligament. It enters the deep inguinal ring. So before childbirth, the external cervical os is a small regular oval opening. After labor, especially vaginal childbirth, the orifice is converted into a transverse slit that is divided such that there are the so-called anterior and posterior cervical lobes. If a lady has not gone into labor and she had a cesarean section for whatsoever reason, then probably most of the time we do not get these changes in the cervix. So the word vaginal birth is very important. Now, as I discussed in the previous slide, these are the two loops of the cervix. If torn deeply during labor or delivery, the cervix may heal in such a manner that it appears irregular, nodular, or stellate. This is what we get in after vaginal delivery, and this looks like a nulliparous cervix. The cervical surface that radially surrounds the external os is called the ectocervix and is lined predominantly by non-keratinized stratified squamous epithelium. In contrast, the endocervical canal is covered by a single layer of mucin-secreting columnar epithelium, which creates deep cleft-like enfolding or glands. The word cervical glands which we use is these only. Commonly during pregnancy, the endocervical epithelium moves out and onto the ectocervix in a physiological process termed the eversion. Somebody call it ectoropion, but I advise you to remember the word eversion. The cervical stroma is composed mainly of collagen, elastin, proteoglycans, but very little smooth muscle. Changes in the amount, composition, and orientation of these components lead to cervical ripening prior to labor onset. So we get lot of, this is called preparation for delivery, and we see a lot of changes in the cervix. In pregnancy, increased vascularity within the cervix stroma beneath the epithelium creates an ectocervical blue tint that is characteristic of Chadwick sign. And cervical edema leads to softening called Goodell signs, whereas isthmic softening is called Heger sign. These all are written in our practical obstetric books, different types of signs. Now, myometrium and endometrium. Most of the uterus is composed of myometrium, which contains smooth muscle bundle, united by connective tissue with many elastic fibers. Interlacing myometrial fibers surround myometrial vessels and contract to compress these. See, they are interlaced like this. And the vessel lumen is in between. So when the delivery occurs, then these interlacing myometrial fibers contract and they occlude the lumen of the vessel. And that is the reason how PPH is prevented in a normal case after delivery. This anatomy allows hemostasis at the placental site during the third stage of labor, and the number of myometrial fibers varies with location. Myometrium levels progressively diminish caudally such that in the cervix muscle make up to only 10%. It was almost 90% in the fundus, but now as it reaches the cervix, only cervix is composed of only 10% of myometrial tissue mass, and the uterine body's inner wall has relatively more muscle than its outer layers. In the anterior and posterior walls, the muscle content is greater than in lateral wall, and during pregnancy, the upper myometrium undergoes marked hypertrophy, but cervical muscle content does not change significantly. We have to know the changes, what happens in pregnancy, in a pregnant uterus. One great obstetrician has said that if the cardiologist doesn't know what is uterus, then he doesn't know what is the best organ in the body. Uterus is the only organ which is, to start with, which is small in a non-pregnant uterus and may become big up to 40 weeks of length at term size. The uterine cavity is lined with endometrium, which is composed of overlying epithelium, invaginating glands, and the supportive vascular stroma. And it varies greatly throughout the menstrual cycle. You all know that in a 28 days regular cycle, it sees different type of physiological hormonal changes, and in response to them, the histopathology changes. So what is this is called the menstrual cycle. So this layer is divided into a functionist layer, which is stuffed with menses, and a basalis layer, which serves to regenerate the functioning layer following each menses. So the regenerative quality is there in the endometrium, And during pregnancy, the endometrium is termed decidua and undergoes dramatic hormonally driven alterations. Now, this is very important part. There are several ligaments which extend from the uterine surface towards the pelvic side wall, and they include round ligament, broad ligament, cardinal ligament, and uterosacral ligament. We also call it cardinal ligament McEnroe's ligament. Despite their epilation, the round and broad ligament provide no substantial uterine support, which in contrast, the cardinal and uterosacral ligament give supports. That's why when we do surgery for support and vaginal prolapse, then it is very important to repair the cardinal and uterosacral ligament and to shorten them. So this is another picture of pelvic viscera and their connective tissue. Rectum behind, uterus in the middle, and bladder anteriorly. And this is the relationship. In internal iliac vessel, they are the main vessels of the pelvis. Ureter has two parts, abdominal and pelvic part. Pelvic part is very important, and for a gynecologist point of view and also an obstetrician point of view, the relationship of ureter and uterine artery, you will always see that everybody, whoever is teaching you, will discuss this again and again. And in spite of that, we forget. So always remember this relationship. I will come to this later on. And levator ani is a very important muscle. It I discussed in my previous class also. And while doing any surgery on the uterus, like hysterectomy or cesarean, because of the close proximity of the bladder, sometimes if not following the surgical rules, then we might end up injuring the bladder. So bladder is a very important anterior relationship of the uterus. Round ligament, they originate somewhat below and anterior to the origin of fallopian tubes. I have already told you. Clinically, this orientation can aid fallopian tube identification during puerperal sterilization. And this is important if pelvic adhesion limit tubal motility and thus hinder fimbrial visualization and tubal conformation prior to ligation. You know, unless you confirm a structure, you never do any surgery on that structure. Remember it. Each round ligament extends laterally and down into the inguinal canal, through which it passes to terminate in the upper portion of the ipsilateral labium majus. And Sampson's artery, a branch of the uterine artery, runs within this ligament. Right now, maybe you are not feeling about the importance of Sampson artery, but I've done a lot of hysterectomies, and I've seen during hysterectomies when we cut and ligate we ligate and cut the round ligament. Sometimes if the ligature slips, we see a lot of bleeding, and the reason behind this lot of bleeding is this important Sampson's artery which goes through the ligament. Now, in non-pregnant women, the round ligament varies from 3 to 5 millimeter in diameter. It is composed of smooth muscle bundles with fibrous tissue. And during pregnancy, these ligaments undergo considerable hypertrophy and increase appreciably in both length and diameter. Broad ligament is a very important part. If we don't talk about broad ligament, we don't talk about obstetrics and gynecology. The broad ligaments are two wing-like structures. I've already shown you in my previous slides that they are wing-like, and they extend from lateral uterine margins to the pelvic side walls. They actually attach to the pelvic side wall. And they consist of a double layer of drape of peritoneum. The anterior and posterior layers of this drape are termed the anterior and the posterior leaves respectively. And in forming the broad ligament, this peritoneum folds over structures extending from So coming to peritoneal folds, the peritoneum that folds over the fallopian tube is termed mesosalpinx. There are different names, and please remember each of them carefully. They are related with the actual structure with which they are attached. Mesosalpinx, that is over the fallopian tube, because we called fallopian tube salpinx also, if you remember. And around the round ligament, it is called mesoteres. And that over the ovarian ligament, it is called mesovarium. And peritoneum that extends beneath the fembrated end of the fallopian tube towards the pelvic wall forms the suspensory ligament or the infundibular pelvic ligament of the ovary, because the ovary suspends from it in the pelvic cavity. Now, infundibular pelvic ligament contains nerves and ovarian vessels, and during pregnancy, these vessels, especially the venous plexuses, are dramatically enlarged. If while doing ligation along with cesarean, somehow accidentally we have pricked this part, then there will be a lot of hematoma formation. So we have to save these venous, puncturing the venous plexuses. Especially the diameter of the ovarian vascular pedicle increases from 0.9 to 2.6 centimeter, almost 3 times at top. Cardinal ligaments, they are also called the transverse cervical ligament or McIntosh ligament. Why transverse cervical? Because they are at the level of the cervix and spread transversely. They anchor medially to the uterus and upper vagina, and it is the thick base of the broad ligament. And it helps in the support of the uterus. And as such, during cesarean hysterectomy, sturdy clamps and sutures are required for its transaction and ligation. Uterosacral ligament, as the name says, they are going to the sacrum from the uterus. Each uterosacral ligament originates with a posterolateral attachment to the supravaginal portion of the cervix and inserts into the fascia over the sacrum. They mainly have connective tissue, small bundles of vessels, nerves, and smooth muscles, and they're covered by peritoneum, and they form the lateral boundaries of the pouch of Douglas. Now, you must have been acquainted with the word parametrium, paracolpium, all these. So let's revise. Hello, yes, Dr. Taruna, any disturbance? Or everything is okay?
Yes, Dr. Shashi, all good. All good.
Okay, okay.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
parametrium, this word is used to describe the connective tissue adjacent and lateral to the uterus within the broad ligament. When we do surgery for like Bardheim surgery for cancer cervix, you must have heard your seniors speaking about parametrium, part of parametrium taken. So this is parametrium. It is in connection with the uterine part. It becomes paracervical when it is adjacent to the cervix, and it becomes paracolpium when the tissue is lateral to the vaginal walls, because we also call vagina the colpos. So very important part, coming to the pelvic blood supply. During pregnancy, there is marked hypertrophy of the uterine vasculature, which is supplied principally from the uterine and ovarian arteries. The uterine artery is the main branch of the internal iliac artery, previously called the hypogastric artery, and it enters the base of the broad ligament. This slide is all slides are important, but here I'm just describing the relationship of the uterine artery with the ureter. The uterine artery courses medially to the lateral side of the uterus, approximately 2 centimeters lateral to the cervix. The uterine artery crosses over the ureter. And this is the area where there is a tendency of injuring the ureter. So we have to push the bladder down while doing cesarean section and then make an incision in the lower segment. And while doing a gynecological hysterectomy, we have to push the bladder down. And by pushing the bladder down, the ureter goes laterally and then we apply the clamp. And it is better that you always open the retroperitoneum, see the ureter, and then you apply clamp in hysterectomy. By that time, you can see the ureter, it is below, lift the uterus vertically upwards and then apply clamp for the uterine artery. And there are some other places where we may also injure structures, like at the level of infundibulopelvic ligament. When we apply clamp, there are chances of injuring the ureter. But that's a different subject that we will cover in hysterectomy. So the proximity, this proximity is of great surgical significance, as the ureter may be injured or ligated during hysterectomy when the uterine vessels are clamped and ligated. All of you must have seen it. So this is another picture of uterus and nexa and associated anatomy. This I have already shown you. Why have I put this picture is to show you the relationship of ureter and the uterine artery. You see, this is ureter. It is coming from above to below. This is the pelvic part of ureter, and uterine artery going from below to upwards. And at one place here, just adjacent 2 centimeters away from the cervix, it crosses it from lateral to medial side and then goes above. And here it's anastomosis with the uterine branch of the ovarian artery. So actually, the word ovarian artery ligation is a misnomer. When we ligate here, then this is a ligation of the utero-ovarian anastomosis, because the ovarian artery is here. We are not ligating that in stepwise devascularization. So coming to pelvic blood supply, once the uterine artery has reached the supravaginal portion of the cervix, it divides. The smaller or cervicovaginal artery, they supply both blood to the lower cervix and the upper vagina. The main uterine artery branch turns abruptly upward and travel cephalad along the lateral margin of the uterus. Along its part, this main artery provides a big branch to the upper cervix, and numerous other medial branches serially penetrate the body of the uterus to form the arcuate arteries. Each branch of the uterine artery arches across the organ by coursing with the myometrium, within the myometrium, just beneath the serosal surface, as indicated by the name. Arcuate vessels from each side anastomose at the uterine midline. And then comes the radial artery. Branches originate at right angles from the arcuate arteries, and they travel inward through the myometrium, enter the endometrium and decidua, branch there to become either basal arteries or coiled spiral arteries. And the spiral arteries supply the functional layer And they are also called the straight arteries. The basal arteries extend only into the basalis layer, as the name says. As uterine artery crosses scaphoid, it gives rise to assumption artery of round ligament that we have already discussed. And just before the main uterine artery vessel reaches the fallopian tube, it divides into 3 terminal branches. The ovarian branch of the uterine artery forms an anastomosis with the terminal branch of the ovarian artery, and the tubal branch makes its way through the mesosalpinx and supplies part of the fallopian tube. The fundal branch penetrates the uppermost uterus. Now coming to the blood supply of ovarian artery. In addition to the uterine artery, the uterus receives blood supply from the ovarian artery. This artery is a direct branch of the aorta and enters the broad ligament through the infundibulopelvic ligament that we have already discussed. At the ovarian hilum, it divides into the smaller branches and enters the ovary. And as the ovarian artery runs along the hilum, it also sends several branches through the mesosalpinx to supply the fallopian tube. So the ovarian artery also gives supply to the fallopian tube. That's why the pelvic organs are highly vascular. Now, ovarian artery, its main stem, however, traverses the entire length of the broad ligament towards the uterine column, and it forms an anastomosis with the ovarian branch of the uterine artery. And this dual uterine blood supply creates a vascular reserve to prevent uterine ischemia if ligation of the uterine or internal iliac artery is performed and to control postpartum hemorrhage. And we take advantage of this fact, and that's why in severe postpartum hemorrhage, which is not responding to the balloon tamponade stage, and patient is still stable, then we can do internal iliac artery ligation in order to preserve uterus and prevent PPH. Now, uterine veins, they accompany their respective arteries. The arcuate veins unite to form the uterine vein. We are now going in reverse fashion of artery, and these arcuate veins unite to form the uterine vein, which empties into the internal iliac vein and then the common iliac vein. You know that internal iliac artery is a branch of the common iliac artery, which divides into internal and external iliac artery, which is in turn is a branch of the biggest vessel of upper body, abdominal aorta. So the veins are going in reverse, and some of the blood from the upper uterus, the ovary, and the upper part of the broad ligament is collected by several veins. Within the broad ligament, these veins form the large pampiniform plexus that terminates in the ovarian vein, and from here, right ovarian vein empties into the vena cava. This we read in our MBBS classes also. I think few MBBS students have joined. This class is as important for postgraduate students and equally important for undergraduate students because the anatomy is same. The left ovarian vein empties into the left renal vein usually, and the right ovarian vein empties into the vena cava. This is a difference in the termination of the veins. Now, internal iliac artery, it supplies the pelvis chiefly, and this is predominantly provided by branches of internal iliac artery, and these branches are organized into anterior and posterior division. For any gynecologist and obstetrician, it is very important to know the divisions of internal iliac artery, its origin, and its different branches. So that's why purposefully I kept a beautiful chart. You see, this is internal iliac artery, a branch of the common iliac artery. It is usually the medial structure. When common iliac artery divides, the external iliac artery goes laterally, and it is continues as a femoral artery below the inguinal ligament. Now, and internal iliac artery has got anterior division, and all the visceral branches are through the anterior division. And the posterior division has only the parietal branches, like iliolumbar, lateral sacral, and superior gluteal, and accordingly they supply that area. All the visceral branches, like uterine, vesical, middle rectal, they are from the anterior division. Besides this, it gives also umbilical artery, the obturator artery. Uterine artery is the biggest visceral branch. It also gives internal pudendal artery, which is the main blood supply of many parts of the internal genital organs. The anterior division provides blood supply to the pelvic organs, perineum, and includes all these: inferior gluteal, internal pudendal, middle rectal, vaginal, uterine, obturator, umbilical, and its continuation as a superior vesical artery. It's a beautiful picture. This is abdominal aorta, common iliac. One side it is shown, divides into internal iliac, which has a smaller diameter, and this is external iliac. It is continued here as femoral artery, and this internal iliac gives posterior division. It has gone here, and this is the anterior division. And we ligate the artery here for PP is the anterior division as soon as it gives the posterior division. In fact, it gives the posterior division as soon as after its origin. And these are the different branches supplying the different parts of pelvic viscera. This is the uterine artery. The posterior division branches, as I've already told you, gluteal, laterosacral, iliolumbar, and they supply the buttock and thigh. And because of this reason, during internal iliac artery ligation, many advocate ligation distal to the posterior division. In fact, we are doing this only to avoid compromised blood flow to the area supplied by this division. So next important part is pelvic lymphatics. The lymphatics from the uterine corpus are distributed into two groups of nodes, and these are very important. Knowing the anatomy, both surgical anatomy is very important for doing any type of cancer surgeries. One set of vessel drain into internal iliac nodes, the other set in paraortic lymph nodes, that from the ovarian region, and the lymphatics from the cervix terminate mainly in the internal iliac nodes, which are situated near the bifurcation of the common iliac vessels. Pelvic innervation. The peripheral nervous system is divided into somatic division, which innervates the skeletal muscle, and the autonomic division, which innervates the smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and glands. And pelvic visceral innervation is predominantly autonomic, which is further divided into sympathetic and parasympathetic components. Now, sympathetic innervation begins with the superior hypogastric plexus, also termed the presacral nerve. Beginning below the aortic bifurcation and extending downward retroperitoneally, this plexus is formed by sympathetic fibers arising from the spinal levels of T10 through L2. And at the level of the sacral promontory, this superior hypogastric plexus divides into right and left hypogastric nerve, which run downward along the pelvic side wall. So this is the picture. Superior hypogastric plexus, right hypogastric nerve. And here we see the pelvic splanchnic nerves that I will come. So this is superior hypogastric plexus. Later, it will have divisions like vesical plexus and all these uterovaginal plexus or Frankenhaeuser's ganglion that I will come to the next slides. So in contrast, the parasympathetic innervation to the pelvic viscera derives from the neurons at spinal levels of S2 to S4. In this diagram, they are shown. Their axons exit as part of the anterior MI of the spinal for those levels, and they combine on each side to form the pelvic splanchnic nerves termed the nervi arigentis. Pelvic plexus, blending of the two hypogastric nerves, sympathetic, and the two pelvic splanchnic nerves, parasympathetic, gives rise to the inferior hypogastric plexus and also termed the pelvic plexus. And this retroperitoneal plaque of nerves lies at the S4 and S5 level. Hypogastric plexus, from here the fibers of this plexus accompany internal iliac artery, branches to their respective pelvic viscera, and the inferior hypogastric plexus divides into three plexuses. I had shown you in my earlier slide. The vesical plexus innervates the bladder, the medial rectal plexus travels to the rectum. So last but not the least is the uterovaginal plexus. We also call it Frankenhaeuser's plexus. It reaches the proximal fallopian tube, uterus, and upper vagina, and extensions of the inferior hypogastric plexus also reach the perineum along the vagina and urethra to innervate the clitoris and vestibular valve. This uterovaginal plexus is composed of variably sized ganglia, but particularly of a large ganglionic plate that is situated on either side of the cervix and proximate to the uterosacral and cardinal ligaments. Now we have discussed about the parasympathetic and sympathetic part. Let's come to the sensory supply. For the uterus, most of the afferent sensory fiber ascend through the inferior hypogastric plexus and enter the spinal cord via T10 through T12 and L1 spinal nerves. And these transmit the painful stimuli of contractions to the central nervous system. For the cervix and upper part of the birth canal, sensory nerves pass through the pelvic splanchnic nerves to the second, third, and fourth sacral nerves. You always remember in pelvis S2, S3, S4. Last, those from the lower portion of the birth canal pass primarily through the pudendal nerve, pudendal artery, internal pudendal artery. These are also very important terminologies in the pelvis, and anesthetic blocks used during delivery target these levels of innervation. You must have heard of pudendal block also. So very important structure, ovaries, female gonads. Along the pelvic side wall, they lie in the vicinity of the pelvic side wall. Each ovary usually rests in the ovarian fossa of Golgi. In your anatomy classes, you must have seen ovarian fossa, which is a slight depression between the external and internal iliac vessels. And during childbearing years, ovaries vary in size, like 2.5 to 5 centimeter in length, this much in width, and 0.6 to 1.5 centimeter in thickness. This is the medial view of boundaries of ovarian fossas. This diagram is a sketchy diagram, and it's very easy to draw. And I request you, whenever you get such questions regarding anatomy or relationship of ovary, you please draw this sort of diagram. And I have told already in my previous classes that there are some standard colors, so you can use those standard colors. And you see here, you can see the relationship of obturator artery, obturator nerve, external iliac artery, internal iliac artery, and superior vesical artery, obliterated umbilical artery in relationship. I can share my presentation through Unbuy Office. After all, knowledge is for spreading and sharing, so you can take my presentation. The ovarian ligament, also called the uterovarian ligament. And one more thing I want to say, that this presentation is exclusively made from a very authentic textbook, Williams Obstetrics. So you can write it as it is. There is no confusion, and it can always be quoted. And every time I put emphasis on the fact that you should always read from big, good textbooks so that you can quote it. Otherwise, a lot of confusion will arise. So the ovarian ligament is also called the uterovarian ligament, and it originates from the upper posterolateral portion of the uterus, just beneath the tubal insertion level, and it extends to the trine pole of the ovary. When you are shown a specimen in your exam of uterus along with ovaries, the ovaries you will always see on the posterior aspect. Remember it. Fallopian tube in the top and middle, and round ligament on the anterior side. It measures a few centimeter long and 3 to 4 centimeter in diameter, and the ligament is made up of muscle and connective tissue. It is covered by the peritoneum, called the mesovarium. We have talked about mesovarium, mesosalpinx, mesoteres, and blood supply reaches the ovary through this double-layered mesovarium to enter the ovarian hilum. The ovarian vessels enter through the ovarian hilum. So this is a diagram showing the location of the ovary. The ovary consists of an outer cortex and inner medulla. You must have heard of cortex and medulla in many other structures also, like in kidney. In young women, the cortex is smooth, has a dull white surface. Actually, we see this color, and is lined by single layer of cuboidal epithelium, which is also called the germinal epithelium of Boulder. This epithelium is supported by connective tissue condensation called tunica albuginea. And beneath this, the ovarian cortex contains oocytes and developing follicles. And the medulla is composed of loose connective tissue, numerous arteries and veins, and a small amount of smooth muscle fibers. So nerve supply of the ovary, it is supplied by both sympathetic and parasympathetic nerves. The sympathetic nerves are derived primarily from the ovarian plexus that accompanies ovarian vessels and originates in the renal plexus. Others are derived from the plexus that surrounds the ovarian branch of the uterine artery, and parasympathetic input is from the vagus nerve. It is the 10th cranial nerve of our body, and sensory efferents follow the ovarian artery and enters at T10 spinal cord level. So this is one of the most important organ amongst the female generative organs, fallopian tube, also called oviduct, and they are sometimes also called uterine tube. There are serpentine tubes extending laterally from the cornu, and their length varies from 8 to 14 centimeter. You may get MCQs, and for answering the MCQs, you know that we get choices like 8 to 12, 8 to 10, 8 to 7. So you have to click, or you have to mark the most accurate answer, whatever is written in textbook. And if you mark it incorrectly, then you may lose. In fact, negative marking do occur. So it is very important that you develop a habit of reading from good textbooks and answer the question correctly, even in MCQ format. That will increase your chance of getting selected. So anatomically, it is classified along their length as interstitial portion. The word means, the name says where it lies. And then isthmus, then ampulla, and infundibula. You see? This is isthmus, how it looks like on cross section, ampulla on cross section, and infundibulum on cross section. This is a schematic diagram. If you can't, it is very easy to draw this diagram also, but you can draw this diagram also. Isthmus, ampulla, and this is infundibulum, very sketchy diagram. And relationship of ovarian artery, ovarian ligament, uterine artery, ureter. At least try to draw at least 1 or 2 diagrams in such questions. So these are the photographs of corresponding histological sections. This is infundibula, ampulla, and isthmus. Now, most proximal, the interstitial portion is embodied within the uterine muscular wall. It is embedded in the uterine muscular wall. You must have heard of the pregnancy in the interstitial part. Next, the narrow 2 to 3 mm wide isthmus widens gradually into the 5 to 8 millimeter wide ampulla, and the infundibulum is the funnel-shaped fimbriated distal extremity of the tube, which opens into the abdominal cavity. It is just open in the abdominal cavity. That's why we usually say that whatever is in the abdominal cavity, suppose cancer occurs in ovary or femoral end of the tube, then that spreads very fast because the whole of the peritoneal cavity has an access to this. These later 3 exuterine portions are covered by the mesosalpinx at the superior margin of the broad ligament. In cross section, the exuterine fallopian tube contains mesosalpinx, myosalpinx, and endosalpinx. The outer of these, the mesosalpinx, is a single cell mesothelial layer functioning as visceral peritoneum. In the myosalpinx, smooth muscle is arranged in an inner circular and outer longitudinal layer, and the tubal musculature undergoes rhythmic contractions. It is very, very important, this rhythmic contraction. It, in fact, transports the ova from the fallopian to the area of fertilization. Transports the ova from the fimbria to the area of fertilization, and constantly the rate of which varies with cyclical ovarian hormone changes. This picture shows the superior view of horizontal section through the right ovarian fossa and the lateral part of the broad ligament. Very schematic diagram. Anterior and posterior layers of the broad ligament, anterior part, posterior part, and these are the different lining and cross sections of the vessels. And this is the ovarian artery which enters through the hilum, and obliterated umbilical artery lies in relationship, and this is mesovarium. The tubal mucosa or endosalpinx is a single layer of columnar epithelium composed of ciliated secretory intercalary cells. Tube has got many cilia because that will help in transport, and it rests on a sparse lamina propria, and clinically its close proximity to the underlying myosalpinx contributes to easy invasion by ectopic trophoblast. That's why the commonest site for ectopic pregnancy is in the fallopian tube, and the tubal mucosa is arranged in longitudinal folds that becomes progressively more complex towards the fimbria. Now coming to the ampulla, the domain is occupied almost completely by the arborescent mucosa. I have shown you in the picture cross section. The current produced by the tubal cilia is such that the direction of flow is towards the uterine cavity, and the tubal peristalsis created by cilia and muscular layer contraction is believed to be an important factor in ovum transport, and that's why we say that the tube is very important in fertility. And when we investigate a case of infertility, then we do test tubal patency test and tubal function. Nerve supply of the fallopian tube. The tubes are supplied richly with elastic tissue, blood vessels, and lymphatics. Their sympathetic innervation is extensive in contrast to their parasympathetic innervation. And this nerve supply derives partly from the ovarian plexus and partly from the uterovaginal plexus, and sensory afferent fibers ascend to T10 spinal cord levels. Lower urinary tract structures, bladder. Anteriorly, the bladder rests against the inner surface of the pubic bones, and then as it fills also against the anterior abdominal wall. You know, bladder is a very important anterior structure of the uterus and vagina, so we have to discuss bladder in our anatomical parts. Posteriorly, it rests against the vagina and cervix, and anteriorly there is a uterovesical pouch that we have already discussed, and it is very important in terms of doing cesarean sections and doing a hysterectomy. Every time you have to cut the uterovesical peritoneum and you have to push the bladder. And that is a very important step in any obstetric and gynecological operation. And the bladder is divided into a dome and a base approximately at the level of the ureteral orifices. And the dome is thin-walled. and it is sensible, and the base is thicker and undergoes less distension during filling. So let's discuss the vesical trigone. All of you must have heard the term bladder trigone. It lies in the bladder base and contains both urethral orifices. You will see two urethral orifices in the trigone and the internal urethral meatus. That means we see three apertures, 1, 2, and this is the third one. These are urethral orifices. The urethral lumen begins at this meatus and then courses through the bladder base for less than 1 centimeter. Female urethra is only 4 centimeter, and that's why females tend to have lots of urinary tract infections, and they have more chances of stress incontinence. This region where the urethral lumen traverses the bladder base is called the bladder neck. So when we talk about treating stress incontinence or other supportive measurements provided for urinary leakage, then we use the word bladder neck. So what is bladder neck? The region where the urethral lumen traverses the bladder base is called the bladder neck. So you see in this picture, this is bladder trigone. Here we see levator ani muscles, and here the relationship of ischial spine. Then we have different supports: cardinal ligament, vesicouterine fold, arcus tendineus fascia pelvis, arcus tendineus levator ani, and rectovaginalis, and paravaginal or paracolpium. This picture shows pelvic viscera and their connective tissue support. We have round ligament, it is not a very good support. Then this cardinal ligament is a very good support. The uterosacral ligament, which has gone posteriorly, posterolateral side, this is also a very good support. And then levator ani muscle too, paracolpium, and the fusion of the anterior urethra, that also helps in support. So coming to the bladder wall, it consists of coarse bundles of smooth muscle known as the detrusor muscle. If we talk about bladder, there is only muscle name which we remember is the detrusor muscle, which extends into the proximal part of the urethra, and a submucosal layer that intervenes between the detrusor muscle and the mucosa. And the bladder mucosa consists of transitional epithelium. Basically, transitional epithelium is the epithelium of the urogenital tract, and there is an underlying lamina propria. So blood supply to the bladder, it arises from the superior vesical arteries, which are the branches of the patent portion of the umbilical artery, and from the middle and inferior vesical arteries. When present, often arise from either the internal pudendal or the vaginal arteries. So this is basically the blood supply structure of the pelvis, and it is very nicely supplied by all the blood vessels. And the main supply is obviously the branches from the anterior division of the internal iliac artery. So bladder gets 3 blood vessels: superior vesical artery, middle and inferior vesical arteries, and sometimes from vaginal arteries also. So nerve supply to the bladder from the vesical plexus, a component of the inferior hypogastric plexus, supplies. And coming to the ureter. Ureter is very, very important in both the obstetric and gynecological surgeries. And sometimes a big broad ligament tumor, very big mass, ovarian mass, they all cause pressure on the ureter, and that may lead to hydronephrosis. You must have heard in cases of, when you take history, in cases of leiomyoma, suggestive of subserous leiomyoma, or a myoma intramural, which is putting pressure on the ureter, and patient have pressure symptoms. Many a times patients come with pressure symptoms. So ureter is a very, very important organ coming from the kidney, ending up in the bladder, and it has got 2 parts, abdominal part and pelvic part. For us, the pelvic part is very, very important. As the ureter enters the pelvis, it crosses over the bifurcation of the common iliac artery, and it passes just middle to the ovarian vessels. And even while we are ligating the infundibulopelvic ligament for removing the ovary, there are high chances of injuring the ureter. There are 3-4 places where we may injure the ureter that we will discuss in our hysterectomy classes. And the ureter descends into the pelvis. It lies medial to the internal iliac branches and anterolateral to the uterosacral ligament. The ureter then traverses through the cardinal ligament, approximately 1 to 2 centimeters lateral to the cervix. And I have already told you this relationship is very, very, very important. So this is the ureter and relationship of the ureter with the bladder, with the uterus. You know, it is almost in the substance, see, it's like substance of the uterus. And here we tend to injure it. In fact, when we do stepwise devascularization and like it 2 parts of the uterine artery, even then we have to be careful. Near the level of the uterine isthmus, it courses below the uterine artery and travels anteromedially towards the bladder base. In this path, it runs close to the upper third of the anterior vaginal wall. So the third place, besides the level of cervix, when we apply clamp on the upper third of the anterior vaginal wall, when we are applying the last clamp of hysterectomy, even that time also we may injure the ureter. And finally, the ureter enters the bladder and travels obliquely for approximately 1.5 centimeters before opening at the ureteral orifices. And this is the place where we may injure the ureter. So it is very, very important to dissect the uterovesical peritoneum and push the bladder down. Then ureter will go laterally. So blood supply of the pelvic ureter from the vessels it passes, common iliac, internal iliac, uterine artery, and superior vesical vessels. The ureter's course runs medial to these vessels and thus its blood supply reaches the ureter from lateral sources. It is important during ureteral isolation, and a vascular anastomosis on the connective tissue sheet enveloping the ureter form a longitudinal network of vessels. We hold the ureter while doing Bardheim's operation also with the Babcock's forces. So this is all for today's class, and thank you so much for patiently hearing. I give thanks with bringing greetings from my hospital, the Deen Dayal Upadhyay Hospital, Delhi. Over to you, Dr. Taruna. Dr. Taruna?
Yes, you can hear me? Everybody can hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. So thanks, Dr. Shashi. I think in just one word, it was a wow class for the PG students. The wow would be the word because it was a beautiful presentation with such beautiful diagrams. And I think the best thing is that if the students want, they can take your presentation, as you said.
Yes.
Yeah, so that is, I think, very important. And the diagram, especially, I think they would be very helpful for all the students. They are really a good learning experience. So thank you, Dr. Shashi, for this nice presentation. I would like to also thank Anbai for organizing these webinars, which really help in excelling our medical education, especially among our students. So thank you to one and all present here. Thanks to all the students, because it is for you and because of you that the presentation would turn out to be good. So any questions? I don't think so. I can't see anything in the chat box.
There is no question in chat box.
Yeah. So they've all just said a thank you, ma'am, for the nice class.
Yes. Anatomy is self-explanatory. You have to revise it again and again, and then you will become master.
Absolutely. Even a few things, I think, as I was hearing to you, even I felt that maybe I also had to revise them.
Yeah, exactly.
So, really nice.
Keep on revising.
We keep on revising. So it's very good. Yeah. So thank you so much, everybody.
Yes.
Ma'am, you would like to say anything?
Yeah, thank you so much, Dr. Taruna, for moderating my session. And thank you, dear students, for listening. And thank you, Anbai, for giving us this opportunity.
Okay, thank you, everybody.
Thank you, madam. Thanks for your time. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.